The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the vast emptiness between worlds. For millennia, the Jedi had studied this mystical field, believing they understood its nature, light and dark, life and death, the endless cycle of existence. But what happens when something arrives that the Force cannot touch? What occurs when a fortress of death, built in another reality by rules the galaxy has never known, tears through the fabric of space itself and brings with it an entity that exists outside the cosmic balance entirely? In the uncharted regions beyond the outer rim, where hyperspace lanes fade into darkness and only the most desperate or foolish travelers venture, reality screamed. The void itself seemed to crack, and from that impossible wound emerged something that should not exist. The Great Tomb of Nazarick materialized in the black between stars, a colossal mausoleum of obsidian and bone, its architecture defying conventional understanding. 9 levels of death and despair wrapped in magical barriers that glowed with sickly green luminescence hung suspended in space as if gravity itself had forgotten this monument existed. At its apex sat the throne room of the Supreme Being, and upon that throne of skulls and gold sat Ainz Ooal Gown. The undead Overlord's skeletal form remained motionless, empty eye sockets blazing with crimson points of malevolent light as he processed the impossible. One moment he had been conducting experiments with super-tier magic in YGDRASIL, attempting to push the boundaries of dimensional manipulation. The next, everything had changed. The sensation was unmistakable. Nazarick had moved, not through space, but through reality itself. And now, staring through the tomb's magical scrying systems at an unfamiliar starfield, Ainz Ooal Gown confronted a truth that even his undead emotional suppression could barely contain. They were no longer in their world. Albedo. Ainz's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, though internally his mind raced with very human panic. Status report. All Guardians to the throne room immediately. The Overseer of the Guardians materialized from the shadows, her obsidian armor gleaming, golden eyes filled with absolute devotion.
Lord Ainz, Nazarick's defensive systems are at full capacity. All Guardians are accounted for. However, she hesitated, an unusual crack in her perfect composure. The world outside, it is not the lands we knew. Demiurge's initial reconnaissance suggests we have been transported to an entirely different reality. Before Ainz could respond, the throne room filled with Nazarick's most powerful denizens. Demiurge arrived with his usual calculating smile. Shaltir, with bloodthirsty eagerness, barely contained. Cositus's armored form radiating battle readiness. And the dark elf twins Ara and Mare looking to their master with unwavering faith. Sebas Tian stood at attention, his butler's demeanor impeccable despite the crisis. Each of them awaited their Supreme Being's wisdom, never doubting that Ainz had planned this impossible translocation. The weight of their expectations crashed against Momonga's very human consciousness, trapped inside this undead shell. They believed he was an all-knowing God King who orchestrated reality itself. In truth, he was a salaryman who had gotten very lucky, or very unlucky, depending on perspective, and now found himself responsible for an entire tomb of loyal NPCs in a completely unknown galaxy. His emotional suppression activated, forcing calm over rising panic. This development, while unexpected, presents opportunities, Ainz declared, his voice carrying confidence he absolutely did not feel. We will approach this new world with caution and intelligence. Demiurge, begin analysis of this realm's power structures, technology, and potential threats. Albedo, maintain Nazarick's defenses at maximum. We assume nothing and prepare for everything. Your wisdom eclipses the stars themselves, Lord Ainz. Demiurge bowed deeply, his tail swishing with barely contained intellectual excitement. I have already detected unusual energy signatures throughout this galaxy, a pervasive field that seems to connect living beings. Curiously, Nazarick registers as a void within this field. We are, in essence, invisible to whatever metaphysical detection system this reality employs. That was something at least. Ainz yoded, maintaining his aura of supreme confidence, while internally thanking whatever gods might listen that Nazarick's magic functioned normally. A quick mental check confirmed his spell arsenal remained intact. Instant death magic, time manipulation, even his super-tier spells. The tomb's NPCs showed no degradation in power. They had arrived at full strength in an unknown galaxy, which meant they possessed advantages no one here could anticipate.
Lord Ainz, Shaltir's voice carried unusual seriousness. There is something else. My vampire senses detect presences, powerful entities scattered across this galaxy, though their nature confuses me. They are not alive in ways I understand, yet not dead either. They wield power that my instincts recognize as dangerous. Ainz's crimson eye flames flickered. Force users, perhaps? This galaxy's equivalent of magic users? Intelligence gathering became the absolute priority. Blundering into an unknown civilization with unknown capabilities was the fastest path to disaster. And despite the Guardian's faith in his genius, Ainz knew he was operating blind. We proceed with extreme caution, Ainz commanded, rising from his throne. The Supreme Being's aura radiated outward, and every Guardian felt the weight of his presence. Initiate protocol observation, minimal contact, maximum intelligence gathering. Deploy infiltration specialists to the nearest inhabited systems. We will learn this galaxy's rules before we reveal ourselves fully. Until we understand the powers that govern this realm, Nazarick remains hidden. As you command, Lord Ainz, the assembled Guardians intoned in perfect unison. Through Nazarick's scrying arrays, Ainz observed distant stars and felt the weight of cosmic loneliness. Somewhere in this vast galaxy, civilizations rose and fell. Powers clashed and forces he couldn't yet comprehend shaped reality. The Great Tomb of Nazarick had arrived in the Star Wars galaxy during the Empire's reign, though Ainz Ooal Gown had no way of knowing that the Fortress of Death, now floating in wild space, would soon attract attention from entities who commanded power through an invisible field called the Force, and who would find the undead overlord's existence philosophically impossible. But impossibility had never stopped Ainz Ooal Gown before. The Sorcerer King would adapt, as he always had, one calculated risk at a time. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you.
The desert world of Tatooine spun lazily beneath its twin suns, a backwater planet where the Empire's grip loosened and the criminal underworld thrived in the spaces between law and chaos. In Mos Eisley's cantina, deals were struck in shadowed booths while alien species from across the galaxy drank, gambled, and pretended not to notice when someone left through the back entrance in a body bag. It was a place where questions went unasked and credits spoke louder than morality, which made it the perfect location for Nazarick's first contact with galactic civilization. Sebas Tian walked through the cantina's entrance with the measured grace of a gentleman butler, his silver hair immaculate, his posture impeccable despite the establishment's decidedly unrefined atmosphere. To the casual observer, he appeared human, distinguished, perhaps overdressed for Tatooine's heat, but unremarkable in a galaxy filled with countless humanoid species. None of the cantina's patrons could sense the truth that beneath his human guise, Sebas was a dragonoid of tremendous power, loyal unto death to the Supreme Being, and capable of shattering durasteel with his bare hands. Behind him, maintaining careful distance, Solution Epsilon adopted the appearance of a beautiful human woman in traveler's clothing. The predatory intelligence behind her pleasant smile would have terrified anyone who understood that her true form was an amorphous predator that dissolved prey in corrosive fluid. But in this cantina, she was simply another face in the crowd, exactly as Lord Ainz had commanded. "Fascinating," Sebas murmured, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation in dozens of languages, many containing references to something called the Empire, rebels, the Force, and a recent destruction of something named Alderaan. His tactical mind catalogued every detail, building a framework of galactic politics from overheard gossip. Solution: remain alert. Gather what information you can without direct engagement. Of course, Sebas-sama, Solution purred, her eyes already tracking a Rodian in the corner who seemed particularly talkative after his third drink.
Sebas approached the bar, where a Wookiee and a roguish-looking human were engaged in what appeared to be a heated negotiation with a slug-like creature surrounded by armed guards. The bartender, a Wookiee with graying fur, gestured toward an empty spot. Sebas sat with the quiet confidence of someone who had never known fear and produced a small gemstone from his pocket. One of Nazarick's lesser treasures, but in this galaxy, likely worth a fortune. "I seek information," Sebas said calmly, placing the gemstone on the bar. Its facets caught the cantina's dim light, and the bartender's eyes whitened. The Wookiee's massive hand carefully picked up the gem, examined it with practiced expertise, then made a rumbling sound that Sebas's magic-enhanced comprehension translated as cautious interest. The Wookiee leaned closer, voice dropping to a growl that only Sebas could hear. The Empire controlled most of the known galaxy through fear and military might, the bartender explained. The rebellion fought against them, though most considered them terrorists or fools. The Force was real, a mystical energy that gave certain individuals terrifying powers, though the Jedi were supposedly extinct and the Emperor's Sith ruled through their Dark Master and his enforcer, Darth Vader. That name, Vader, carried weight even in this lawless cantina. Beings quieted when it was mentioned. Fear rippled through the crowd like a physical presence. And what of creatures unlike those found in your galaxy? Beings of magic, or those who command death itself?
The Wookiee's response was immediate and visceral. Magic wasn't real, only the Force existed, and anything that commanded death was either Sith or something far worse. There were stories, of course, whispered legends from the unknown regions about horrors that defied explanation, but those were spacer tales meant to frighten children. The galaxy had catalogued millions of species. If something truly alien existed, the Empire would have found and catalogued it. Or destroyed it. Sebas absorbed this information with the calm of a master strategist. Lord Ainz's caution had been justified. This galaxy operated under fundamentally different assumptions about power and reality. The Force seemed to be this realm's equivalent of magic, yet it was tied to living beings in ways YGD Drassil's arcane systems were not. Nazarick's undead nature, their heteromorphic forms, their reality-warping magic, all of it would be perceived as impossible, heretical, or threatening. Perfect. The unknown was always an advantage. Across the cantina, Solution had maneuvered herself next to a scarred bounty hunter who was boasting about his latest Imperial contract. She listened with apparent fascination as he described hunting Force sensitives for the Inquisitorius, individuals who could manipulate objects with thought, see the future, and deflect blaster bolts with laser swords. Her mental notes accumulated. These Force users were dangerous but rare, their powers formidable but not insurmountable, and the Empire paid handsomely for their capture or elimination. The conversation shifted when a squad of white-armored stormtroopers entered the cantina, their presence immediately dampening the atmosphere. The lead trooper scanned the room with mechanical efficiency, his helmet's sensors sweeping across every patron. Sebas felt the technological probe wash over him, finding nothing but a humanoid life sign. The trooper's gaze lingered for a moment. Something had registered as unusual. Perhaps the way Sebas's biosignature didn't quite match known human baselines, but without hard evidence, they moved on.
"We're looking for droids," the lead trooper announced. 2 droids, possibly carrying stolen Imperial data. Anyone with information reports to the garrison immediately. The cantina's patrons returned to their drinks, and the stormtroopers departed. But Sebas had noticed something crucial. Their armor was not mystical, but technological. Their weapons fired energy bolts rather than spells, and their scanning equipment operated on principles Nazarick could potentially analyze and counter. This galaxy's power came from technology and this mysterious force, not the arcane arts, which meant Nazarick possessed capabilities this realm had never encountered.
As the twin suns began their descent toward Tatooine's horizon, Sebas and Solution departed the cantina with a wealth of intelligence. They walked through Mos Eisley's dusty streets, observing the mix of humans, aliens, droids, and desperate beings eking out existence on civilization's edge. Above them, stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, including one that seemed to pulse with sickly green luminescence, visible only to those who knew where to look. Nazarick watched from its position in wild space, and Ainz Ooal Gown processed the reports flooding in from his infiltrators. This galaxy was vast, ancient, and embroiled in civil war. Technology had replaced magic, yet this force granted powers that rivaled mid-tier spells. The Empire ruled through fear and overwhelming military strength, while small rebellions sparked like dying embers across the stars. And somewhere in this galactic power structure, entities existed who could sense life and death through mystical connection. Entities who would eventually sense the void where Nazarick floated, a tomb of death that registered as an absence in the Force itself. Demiurge, Ainz commanded from his throne, skeletal fingers steepled in thought. Analyze what we have learned. Formulate 3 potential strategies: alliance, isolation, or dominion. We will not act until we fully understand the pieces on this cosmic board.
Your foresight is magnificent, Lord Ainz, Demiurge bowed, his mind already racing through possibilities that would have horrified anyone familiar with his particular brand of genius. Shall I also prepare contingencies for when these Force users inevitably discover our presence? Ainz's eye flames flickered with crimson intensity. Yes, and Demiurge, ensure those contingencies are educational. Let any who find us understand that Nazarick does not bend to threats. In the depths of wild space, the Great Tomb of Nazarick pulsed with necromantic energy, and the Sorcerer King prepared for the galaxy's inevitable response to an impossibility made manifest.
The Imperial Star Destroyer Executor's will cut through the void of wild space like a blade through silk, its massive wedge-shaped hull bristling with turbolaser batteries and tractor beam projectors. Captain Vren stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back as he reviewed the sensor data that had prompted this expedition into one of the galaxy's most desolate regions. 3 days ago, Imperial deep space monitoring stations had detected an anomaly, a gravitational distortion that appeared without hyperspace signature, without any conventional explanation, and most disturbingly, without any precedent in the Empire's exhaustive stellar cartography databases. "Status report," Vren commanded, his voice carrying the clipped precision of an officer who had survived 5 years under Lord Vader's command by being thorough, efficient, and never making assumptions. "Sir, we are approaching the coordinates now," the sensor officer reported, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Gravitational readings are inconsistent with known phenomena. Mass detection suggests an object approximately 2 kilometers in diameter, but the composition—" He hesitated, and that hesitation made Vren's stomach tighten. "Sir, our sensors are having difficulty maintaining a coherent reading. The object seems to be phasing in and out of normal space-time." "Show me," Vren ordered, stepping toward the main viewport. What materialized before them defied every principle of Imperial engineering and xeno-architectural understanding.
The Great Tomb of Nazarick hung in space like a monument to death itself, its obsidian architecture carved with alien geometries that seemed to twist perspective the longer one looked at them. 9 visible levels descended into depths that the Executor's will sensors couldn't fully penetrate, each level radiating an energy signature that resembled nothing in the Empire's databases. Green luminescence pulsed along the structure's surface in patterns that suggested runic script, though no known language matched the characters. At the apex, what appeared to be a skull the size of a small corvette stared into the void with empty eye sockets that somehow conveyed malevolent intelligence.
"By the Emperor," someone whispered on the bridge, and Vren didn't reprimand them. The statement felt appropriate. "Full sensor sweep," Vren commanded, forcing professionalism over the primal unease crawling up his spine. "Weapon systems on standby. Communications. Attempt standard Imperial hail on all frequencies. And someone get me a tactical assessment. I want to know if that thing is a ship, a station, or something else entirely." The communications officer worked his station with increasing frustration. "Sir, standard frequencies are being absorbed. It's as if the structure is swallowing our transmissions." "Wait." His eyes widened. "Sir, we're receiving a response, but not through our communications array. It's appearing directly on our holographic displays." The bridge's central holotank flickered, and an image coalesced that made every Imperial officer instinctively reach for their sidearms. A skeleton in ornate robes materialized in perfect 3-dimensional detail, its bare skull adorned with what appeared to be golden jewelry, empty eye sockets burning with crimson flames that seemed to pierce through the hologram and examine each officer individually. When it spoke, the voice bypassed their audio systems entirely and resonated directly in their minds, a rich baritone that carried absolute authority and the cold finality of a tomb sealing shut.
I am Captain Vren of the Imperial Navy, representing the Galactic Empire under Emperor Palpatine's authority, he replied, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. This region of space falls under Imperial jurisdiction. Your structure appeared without authorization, without filing approach vectors, and without any identification in our databases. By Imperial law, you are required to submit to inspection and registry.
The skeleton's eye flames flickered, and Vren could have sworn he detected amusement in that inhuman gaze. Imperial law. Fascinating. Tell me, Captain Vren, does your Emperor claim sovereignty over dimensions beyond your own? Does his law extend to realities his sensors cannot detect and his fleets cannot reach? I don't understand.
"Of course you don't," Ainz interrupted, his tone suggesting he was explaining something to a child. "Allow me to clarify your situation. Nazarick exists outside your conventional space-time framework. We arrived here through means your technology cannot replicate, and defenses your weapons cannot penetrate. However, I am not unreasonable. I recognize that dialogue serves both our interests better than conflict, particularly when I require information about this galaxy's power structures, resources, and potential threats." Inside Nazarick's throne room, Momonga's human consciousness screamed with anxiety, even as his undead emotional suppression kept his external demeanor perfectly controlled. He was bluffing on a cosmic scale, gambling that the Star Destroyer's sensors couldn't penetrate Nazarick's defensive barriers enough to assess the tomb's true capabilities. Demiurge stood beside the throne, his smile widening with each exchange. The demon had scripted this entire first contact scenario, anticipating Imperial response patterns based on the intelligence Sebas had gathered. Lord Ainz's wisdom eclipses the stars themselves, Demiurge whispered, just loud enough for his master to hear. The captain is attempting to activate a distress beacon. Shall I disable their communications permanently, or would you prefer a more educational demonstration?
Captain Vren's mind worked through the implications at light speed. An unknown entity with capabilities exceeding current Imperial technology, offering alliance or at least non-aggression. But the physical appearance, an undead skeleton commanding a tomb in space, triggered every xenophobic protocol in Imperial doctrine. The Empire served humanity, and whatever Ainz Ooal Gown was, it definitely wasn't human. Yet Vader wasn't human either, not anymore, and he commanded the Emperor's respect. I am not authorized to negotiate treaties, Vren admitted, choosing honesty over bravado. Your proposition requires command authority far above my rank. However, I can relay your offer to Imperial High Command. They will dispatch appropriate representatives if your terms interest them. Acceptable. Ainz nodded, and Vren noticed that despite the skeleton's lack of facial muscles, the gesture conveyed perfect diplomatic protocol. You will inform your superiors that the Sorceress Kingdom exists, that it claims this region of wild space as sovereign territory, and that I am willing to establish formal diplomatic channels with the Galactic Empire. In the meantime, I suggest your vessel departs. My patience extends to honorable envoys, but should you attempt to probe Nazarick's defenses or deploy scanning equipment beyond passive observation, I will consider it an act of war. Am I understood? Perfectly, Vren replied, already planning his report. Lord Vader would want to know about this immediately. The holographic projection flickered and vanished, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Vren stood motionless for 3 full seconds before turning to his crew. Helm, reverse thrust. Take us back to the hyperspace jump point. Communications, prepare an encrypted transmission for Imperial Center, priority level Alpha. Sensors, compile everything we observed and prepare it for immediate transmission. Move! As the Executor's will slowly withdrew from Nazarick's vicinity, its crew unaware that they were still under perfect observation, Ainz Ooal Gown allowed himself a small internal sigh of relief. The bluff had worked. The Empire would report his existence, send diplomats or warriors, and in the process reveal more about their capabilities and priorities. Meanwhile, Nazarick gained time to establish deeper intelligence networks, analyze this galaxy's power structures, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation with whatever entities commanded this mysterious force. Demiurge, your assessment, Ainz inquired, maintaining his aura of supreme confidence, even as Momonga's mind celebrated surviving first contact without starting an interstellar war. A masterful performance, Lord Ainz. Demiurge bowed deeply,
his tail swishing with genuine pleasure. You have positioned Nazarick as a peer power rather than an anomaly to be studied or destroyed. The Empire will approach us with caution rather than overwhelming force, giving us time to fortify our position and expand our intelligence operations. However, his expression turned contemplative. I suspect this empire serves masters who command more than mere technology. The references to the Force suggest metaphysical operators who may sense Nazarick's true nature. When they arrive, they will not be soldiers, but something far more dangerous. Ainz nodded slowly, his skeletal fingers drumming against the throne's armrest. Then we prepare accordingly. Increase defensive protocols. Have Chaltier ready the vampire brides for potential combat. And Demiurge? He paused, eye flames burning with cold intensity. Begin contingency planning for entities who can manipulate reality through metaphysical means. If this force is their magic system, we need to understand its limitations and exploit its weaknesses. It shall be as you command, Supreme One. Far across the galaxy, on the dark industrial world of Coruscant, an encrypted transmission reached Imperial intelligence and was immediately flagged for the highest priority review. Within the hour, it landed on the desk of a figure cloaked in black, his breathing harsh and mechanical as he reviewed Captain Vren's report. Darth Vader studied the sensor data, the holographic recordings, and the description of the entity calling itself Ainz Ooal Gown. The Force whispered warnings around this anomaly, a void where life should be, a cold spot in the cosmic web that felt like death given form and terrible purpose. Vader had hunted Force sensitives across the galaxy, had faced Jedi Masters and dark side cultists, had seen technological terrors and ancient Sith artifacts. But this was different. This was not simply the dark side's corruption or the light's sanctimony. This was something outside the Force entirely, and that made it either the greatest threat the Empire had ever faced or the most valuable asset the Emperor could claim. Either way, Darth Vader would investigate personally. The Dark Lord of the Sith activated his holographic communicator, and the wizened face of Emperor Palpatine materialized, yellow eyes gleaming with interest. "My master," Vader intoned, kneeling, "we have encountered something unprecedented." "Show me," Palpatine commanded, and Vader transmitted the data. The Emperor's expression shifted from curiosity to fascination to something approaching hunger as he absorbed the information. "A tomb that exists outside conventional reality, an undead entity commanding power we cannot classify. How delightful! Lord Vader, you will take the Executor and a full battle group to this wild space anomaly. Determine if this Ainz Ooal Gown can be made to serve the Empire. If not," Palpatine's smile turned predatory, "destroy it utterly. The galaxy has room for only one absolute power, and that power is mine." "As you wish, my master," Vader replied, and the hologram faded. In the fortress tomb floating in wild space, Ainz Ooal Gown had no way of knowing that he had just attracted the personal attention of the two most dangerous Sith Lords in galactic history. The Sorcerer King believed he had successfully navigated first contact and bought time for intelligence gathering and strategic positioning. He was about to learn that in a galaxy where the Force governed destiny, even the most careful plans meant nothing when Darth Vader decided you were a problem that required his personal attention. The outer rim world of Quen Station orbited a dying red giant, its massive ring-shaped structure serving as a nexus for traders, smugglers, information brokers, and anyone else who preferred to conduct business far from Imperial oversight. The station's neutral status made it perfect territory for Nazarick's expanding intelligence operations. A place where credits talked louder than allegiances, and where unusual beings asking unusual questions drew less attention than they would in more civilized sectors. Sebas sat in a private booth within the station's most exclusive cantina, the Silver Strill, his posture impeccable despite the establishment's dubious clientele.
Kothlaw's ears twitched, a gesture Sebas had learned indicated internal debate. Finally, the Bothan's greed won out over his survival instinct, as Demiurge had predicted it would. Very well, but understand that if Imperial intelligence traces this conversation back to me, these pretty rocks won't save either of us. He leaned forward, voice dropping to barely a whisper. Darth Vader is the Emperor's enforcer, his right hand, and the single most feared individual in the known galaxy. He commands the Death Squadron, a fleet of Star Destroyers including his flagship, the Executor, which is over 19 kilometers long and carries enough power fire to reduce entire planetary populations to ash. Sebas's expression remained pleasant, but internally he was calculating the tactical implications. 19 kilometers. That was nearly 10 times the size of the vessel that had approached Nazarick, and this Vader commanded multiple such vessels. The Empire's military capacity was beginning to reveal itself as far more substantial than initial observations had suggested. What makes Lord Vader specifically dangerous? Sebas inquired. Beyond his military resources. The Force. The Kothlaw said the word like a curse. Vader is a Sith Lord, one of only 2 known practitioners of the dark side who serve the Emperor. He can kill with a thought, crush starship bulkheads with a gesture, and sends deception through some kind of metaphysical perception that no liar has ever successfully fooled. He's hunted down and eliminated every surviving Jedi since the Purge began 20 years ago. Lightsaber duels that should be impossible, he wins. Rebellions that should succeed, he crushes. He is, for all practical purposes, the physical manifestation of the Empire's will, made into a walking nightmare. The Bothan paused, taking a long drink from his glass. There are stories, unconfirmed, you understand, but consistent enough that I believe them, about Vader boarding rebel capital ships alone and slaughtering entire complements of soldiers without his stormtroopers firing a single shot. About him surviving direct hits from turbolaser batteries, about him interrogating prisoners by pulling information directly from their minds, leaving them as vegetables afterward. If your employer has attracted Vader's attention, Mr. Sebas, I would strongly suggest immediate relocation to the unknown regions and hoping he has more pressing concerns.
Sebas absorbed this information with the calm of someone who had faced entities far more terrifying than any mortal warrior, regardless of mystical powers. Still, the description aligned uncomfortably with the capabilities Lord Ainz had theorized these Force users might possess. Reality manipulation through thought, precognitive abilities, mental domination. All of these were concerning, though not insurmountable. Nazarick had countered similar abilities in YGGDR through proper defensive preparation and overwhelming tactical superiority. And the Emperor himself, Sebas pressed, what is known about Palpatine's capabilities? Kotla's fur actually stood on end at the question, a physiological fear response he couldn't quite control. No one knows the full extent of the Emperor's power, and no one who has faced him directly has lived to describe it. What is known comes from oblique observations and the rare occasions when witnesses survived proximity to his actions. He is the ultimate Sith, the master of the dark side, and every force sensitive in the galaxy feels his presence like a weight on their souls. There are whispered legends that he has conquered death itself, that he sees the future with perfect clarity, that he has manipulated galactic events for decades to engineer his rise to absolute power. The Bothan finished his drink in one swallow. My advice, which you're paying handsomely for, whatever operations your employer is conducting, keep them small, quiet, and far away from Imperial attention. The Empire doesn't negotiate with entities it perceives as threats. It annihilates them with systematic efficiency that would impress a virus. And if Vader or the Emperor personally takes interest in your employer, Kotla spread his hands in a gesture of finality, then your employer is already dead. They just don't know it yet. Sebas stood, collecting the remaining gemstones and leaving 3 on the table as payment. Your counsel is noted and appreciated, Kotla. One final question. Are there any entities in this galaxy who have successfully opposed Vader or the Emperor? Any force that represents a counterbalance to their power? The Bothan laughed bitterly. The rebellion tries. They have some success with guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run operations, stealing the occasional shipment or sabotaging the occasional installation. But they're gnats attacking a rancor. The only reason they still exist is because the Empire is so vast that eliminating every cell would require resources better spent on maintaining control of the core worlds. As for entities that could match the Emperor's power, he shook his head. If such a thing exists, it's hiding very well, or it's not from this galaxy at all.
Sebas smiled at that, a genuine expression of satisfaction. Thank you, Kotla. You have been most illuminating. As the butler walked through Quen Station's corridors back toward the docking bay, where a perfectly mundane-looking shuttle waited, he activated the magical communication link that connected him directly to Nazarick. Lord Ainz, I have completed the intelligence gathering. The Empire's capabilities are substantial. However, I believe our initial assessment of their limitations remains accurate. They are powerful by the standards of this galaxy, but they have never faced an entity that operates outside their fundamental metaphysical framework. In Nazarick's throne room, Ainz Ooal Gown received the transmission while surrounded by his assembled guardians. Demiurge stood at his right hand, Albedo at his left, and the other floor guardians arrayed before the throne in perfect formation. The undead Overlord processed Sebas's report with the careful attention of someone who understood that underestimating opponents was the fastest path to disaster. So, this Darth Vader commands a fleet that could potentially threaten Nazarick through sheer overwhelming firepower. And he possesses abilities that suggest mid-tier magical capabilities, combined with enhanced physical attributes and precognitive combat sense. concerning, but not insurmountable. Lord Ainz's tactical genius perceives the true nature of the threat, Demiurge interjected smoothly. May I offer an observation? This Vader's capabilities, while formidable by galactic standards, appear to rely heavily on intimidation and the psychological impact of his mystical powers. Beings who have never encountered true magic, who believe the Force represents the pinnacle of metaphysical capability, would naturally perceive him as invincible. However, we know that reality offers power far beyond what these Force users have conceived. Shaltir giggled, a sound both childish and deeply unsettling. Does this mean I get to play with their strongest warrior? I haven't had a proper challenge since we arrived in this boring galaxy. If this Darth Vader is truly their greatest champion, I want to test whether his Force can stop me from turning him into a lovely undead thrall.
Patience, Shaltir, Ainz commanded, though internally Mamunga was running calculations about whether Shaltir's particular skill set might actually give her an advantage against Force users. Her vampiric abilities operated on principles completely foreign to this galaxy: blood magic, life-draining, mental domination through mechanisms that had nothing to do with midichlorians. Would the Force provide defense against abilities it had never encountered? The uncertainty bothered him. Albedo, status of our defensive preparations. The overseer of the Guardians stepped forward, her golden eyes gleaming with barely contained eagerness to prove herself to her beloved master. Nazarick's barrier defenses have been reinforced to maximum capacity. The Pleiades have established patrol routes covering all approach vectors. Victim has prepared his contingency teleportation protocols should we require immediate tactical withdrawal. And I have personally overseen the activation of the 8th floor containment protocols. Should hostile forces somehow breach the outer levels, they will find themselves facing enemies that will haunt their nightmares until their dying breath. Excellent, Ainz nodded, projecting confidence he absolutely did not feel. The 8th floor contained some of Nazarick's most horrifying defenders, entities that even Mamunga found disturbing despite knowing they were loyal NPCs. If it came to invasion, the attackers would learn the true meaning of the tomb's name. However, I prefer to avoid direct confrontation if possible. Demiurge, what is your assessment of potential diplomatic solutions? The demon's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp and too numerous for any natural mouth. Lord Ainz, your wisdom in seeking peaceful resolution demonstrates the vast gulf between your supreme intellect and the crude machinations of lesser beings. I have formulated 3 potential approaches, each calibrated to different contingencies. Demiurge produced a holographic display, technology Nazarick had reverse-engineered from the Star Destroyers systems during their brief contact, showing a complex web of galactic political relationships. First option, we position Nazarick as a neutral power willing to provide resources and capabilities to the highest bidder. The Empire desires control and fears challenges to its authority, but it also values useful assets. If we can demonstrate value greater than the threat we represent, they may choose incorporation over elimination.
The problem with that approach, Ainz interjected, his tactical mind, honed by years of guild leadership in YGGDRALS, immediately identifying the weakness.
is that it requires revealing our capabilities, which removes our primary advantage. The moment they understand what we can do, they'll begin developing countermeasures. Precisely as I anticipated Lord Ainz would observe, Demiurge bowed deeply, his tail swishing with intellectual excitement. Which leads to the second option. We engage in selective demonstration of power that establishes our strength without revealing our full capabilities. A carefully orchestrated encounter where we defeat a significant Imperial force while appearing to be pressed to our limits. This creates the impression that while Nazarick is powerful, we are not invincible, encouraging negotiation rather than all-out war. Cocytus shifted his massive insectoid form, his warrior's instincts responding to the discussion of combat. Lord Ainz, if we must face this Vader in combat, I request the honor of testing my blade against his lightsaber. The Floor Guardian's segmented voice carried absolute conviction. A warrior must know his enemy's strength. Noted, Cocytus. What is the third option, Demiurge? The demon's expression turned contemplative, almost philosophical. The third option is perhaps the most elegant, but also the most complex. We do not engage the Empire directly at all. Instead, we establish ourselves as a force multiplier for the Rebel Alliance, providing them with resources, intelligence, and strategic support that transforms them from a nuisance into a legitimate threat. This forces the Empire to focus on multiple fronts simultaneously, preventing them from dedicating their full attention to Nazarick, while we quietly expand our influence throughout the Outer Rim and unknown regions. Ainz considered the proposal carefully. Supporting the rebellion had certain appeal. It aligned with the heroic narratives he'd consumed in manga and anime during his life as Momonga, the underdog alliance fighting against overwhelming tyranny. But sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. The rebellion might be morally sympathetic, but were they capable enough to warrant Nazarick's support? Did aligning with them serve the Sorceress Kingdom's interests, or would it simply paint a target on Nazarick that the Empire could justify attacking with full force?
All three options have merit, Ainz declared, rising from his throne. The assembled Guardians immediately straightened to perfect attention, hanging on their supreme being's every word. However, we are making assumptions based on incomplete intelligence. Before committing to any strategy, I want comprehensive information about three specific entities: Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine, and the structure of this force they command. Demiurge, work with Pandora's actor to infiltrate Imperial archives. I want detailed files on every force sensitive the Empire has encountered, every combat engagement Vader has participated in, and every mystical capability the Sith have demonstrated. It shall be done, Lord Ainz. Demiurge bowed. Additionally, Ainz continued, his mind racing through possibilities. Initiate contact with the Rebel Alliance. Not official contact, nothing that commits us to an alliance, but exploratory probes. I want to understand their capabilities, their leadership structure, and their strategic objectives.
If we're going to survive in this galaxy, we need to understand all the major players, not just the Empire. Mar, Ara, he turned to the Dark Elf twins. I want you to begin cataloging this galaxy's biological diversity. If we're going to establish the Sorceress Kingdom here, we'll need to understand what creatures exist naturally and what specimens might be useful for Nazarick's defense or resource production. The twins nodded in unison, Ara's confident grin contrasting with Mar's shy smile. We'll make you proud, Lord Ainz. As the Guardians dispersed to their assigned tasks, Ainz allowed himself a moment of private anxiety before his emotional suppression kicked in. They were playing a game with stakes higher than anything they'd faced in YGDDRSL. In the game, death meant respawning with some penalties. Here, death was final, and the enemies they faced commanded powers that could potentially threaten even Nazarick's formidable defenses. But they also had advantages no one in this galaxy could anticipate. Magic that operated on completely different principles than the Force. Undead that registered as voids in their mystical detection systems. Strategic thinking honed by decades of guild warfare against human opponents far more creative than any AI. And most importantly, they had the element of complete unpredictability, an entity so far outside this galaxy's frame of reference that even the most brilliant military minds couldn't properly assess the threat until it was too late.
Albedo, Ainz called, as the Overseer prepared to depart. Yes, my beloved Lord Ainz. She turned, her expression shifting to one of devoted adoration that made Momonga extremely uncomfortable, but which Ainz Ooal Gown wore with practiced indifference. If Vader comes, and if diplomacy fails, I want you to personally lead Nazarick's defense. Utilize every advantage we possess. Show him that there are powers in this universe that the Force cannot touch, cannot predict, and cannot defeat. But Albedo, he paused, his eye flames burning with cold intensity. Do not kill him if it can be avoided. A defeated Vader who returns to the Emperor with tales of Nazarick's power serves us better than a dead martyr who justifies total war. Albedo's smile was radiant and terrifying in equal measure. Your strategic brilliance knows no bounds, Lord Ainz. I shall ensure that if this Sith Lord faces Nazarick's wrath, he lives just long enough to understand the magnitude of his mistake in challenging the Supreme Being. As she departed, Ainz returned to his throne and pulled up the holographic star charts Nazarick had compiled. The galaxy stretched before him, vast, ancient, and utterly indifferent to the arrival of one undead overlord and his loyal tomb. Somewhere in that incomprehensible expanse, Darth Vader was likely already en route, responding to Captain Vren's report with the full authority of the Empire's military might. Momonga's human mind whispered doubts and fears. Ainz Ooal Gown silenced them with cold calculation. The game had begun, and the Sorcerer King would play to win, even if winning meant redefining what victory looked like in a galaxy far, far away from everything he'd ever known.
The Executor emerged from hyperspace with the terrible majesty of inevitability made manifest. At 19 kilometers of armored fury, Darth Vader's flagship dwarfed every other vessel in the Imperial Navy, save the Death Star itself. Its hull bristled with thousands of turbolaser batteries, ion cannons, and tractor beam projectors capable of snaring capital ships like insects in a web. Behind it, 5 additional Star Destroyers materialized in perfect formation, the full strength of Death Squadron's vanguard, representing enough firepower to reduce entire planetary civilizations to radioactive dust. On the Executor's Bridge, Darth Vader stood motionless before the main viewport, his black armor reflecting the green luminescence of the anomaly that hung in the void before them. The Great Tomb of Nazarick dominated the view screen, its impossible architecture seeming to twist reality around itself in ways that even hardened Imperial officers were uncomfortable. Through the Force, Vader reached out toward the structure, seeking to understand its nature through the mystical energy field that connected all living things. He found nothing. Not the blank absence of a Force null being, not the corrupted darkness of a Sith artifact, not even the cold emptiness of deep space. Where Nazarick existed, the Force simply ended, as if reality itself had been excised and replaced with something fundamentally incompatible with the cosmic web that bound the galaxy together. The sensation was deeply disturbing, like reaching for a limb that had once been amputated and finding the space it once occupied filled with something alien and wrong. Admiral Piet, Vader's mechanical breathing dominated the bridge's silence. Status report. Admiral Piet, a competent officer who had survived longer than most in Vader's service through a combination of efficiency and knowing when not to question orders, stepped forward with a data pad. My lord, we have achieved optimal firing position. All batteries are charged and targeting solutions have been calculated. However, he hesitated, and that hesitation was itself significant. Our targeting computers are experiencing unusual difficulty maintaining lock on the structure. The sensors report mass, but the targeting algorithms keep rejecting the data as impossible.
Explain, Vader commanded, his tone carrying the implicit threat that incompetence would not be tolerated. The structure appears to be phasing in and out of conventional space-time, my lord. Not hyperspace travel, something else entirely. Our sensors detect it clearly in one moment. Then, the next moment they register empty space. Then it returns. The oscillation is rapid enough that visual observation shows no change, but our automated systems are struggling to compensate for what they interpret as sensor malfunction. Vader processed this information, his tactical mind, honed through decades of warfare against Jedi, separatists, and rebels, analyzing the implications. An enemy that existed outside conventional space-time would be nearly impossible to engage with conventional weapons. Turbolasers required targeting locks. Missiles needed sensor guidance. Even the Force, his most reliable tool, seemed unable to penetrate whatever metaphysical barrier surrounded this Nazarick. Attempt communication, Vader ordered. Standard Imperial protocol. If they respond, I will negotiate. If they do not, we will determine their defensive capabilities through direct engagement. The communications officer worked his station, broadcasting on all known frequencies. For several long moments, silence answered. Then, just as the officer prepared to report failure, every holographic display on the bridge activated simultaneously. The image that materialized was identical to the one Captain Vren had described. A skeleton in ornate robes, eye sockets burning with crimson flames, radiating an aura of absolute authority that even through holographic projection
felt tangible. Darth Vader, Ainz Ooal Gown's voice resonated directly in their minds, bypassing audio systems entirely. I wondered how long it would take for the Empire to send its legendary enforcer. Your reputation precedes you, Sith Lord, military commander, and from what my intelligence suggests, a being who exists in a perpetual state between life and death. We have more in common than you might expect.
Vader felt his anger rise at the familiar tone, the presumption of understanding, the complete absence of fear that every other being in the galaxy displayed when facing him. This entity spoke as though they were equals, as though the Dark Lord of the Sith were merely another curiosity to be examined and catalogued. The arrogance demanded correction. "You have violated Imperial space," Vader stated, his mechanical voice carrying cold finality. "You have refused proper identification and registry. You have demonstrated capabilities that represent a potential threat to galactic security. You will submit your vessel for inspection, provide complete documentation of your origins and technology, and accept Imperial oversight of your operations. Refusal will result in the immediate destruction of your structure and the termination of all organic life forms within." Inside Nazarick's throne room, Ainz sat perfectly still on his throne, maintaining his aura of supreme confidence while Mamanga's consciousness screamed with anxiety. The entire Death Squadron hung in the void before them, representing military force several orders of magnitude beyond what they'd faced with the single Star Destroyer. If negotiations failed and combat began, Nazarick could almost certainly survive. The tomb's defensive barriers had been designed to withstand guild raid attacks from YGDRASIL's most powerful players. But surviving wasn't the same as winning, and a protracted siege would force Nazarick to reveal capabilities better kept hidden. Demiurge stood beside the throne, his expression one of barely contained delight. "Lord Ainz, shall I activate the strategic protocols we discussed? A demonstration of power sufficient to encourage negotiation without revealing our full capabilities." Ainz raised one skeletal hand slightly, which appeared casual, but which every guardian in the throne room recognized as permission granted. "Proceed with protocol observation, Phase 2. Let's see how the Empire responds to phenomena their sensors cannot explain."
Demiurge's smile widened impossibly, and he transmitted a series of commands through Nazarick's mystical communication network. Throughout the tomb, entities that had waited in patient readiness since their arrival in this galaxy stirred to wakefulness and moved to assigned positions. On the Executor's bridge, alarms suddenly screamed to life. "My lord!" The sensor officer's voice carried genuine panic, a breach of protocol so severe it would normally warrant disciplinary action. "We're detecting spatial distortions forming around the fleet, multiple signatures, hundreds of signatures materializing from nowhere." The main viewport revealed the impossible. Between each Star Destroyer in the formation, between the Executor and Nazarick, throughout the void of space itself, creatures were appearing through magical portals that tore reality like fabric. Death Knights, mounted on skeletal horses wreathed in green flame. Soul Eaters, whose very presence seemed to drain color from the surrounding vacuum. Eyeball corpses that floated through space without suits or ships, their multiple eyes tracking the Star Destroyers with predatory intelligence. And among them, beings of even greater power. Elder liches wrapped in ancient robes that billowed despite the absence of atmosphere. Doom Lords whose armor pulsed with necromantic energy, and creatures whose classifications existed in no Imperial database. "Battle stations," amended Admiral Pyatt, his professional calm cracking as he witnessed entities that defied every principle of physics and biology he'd ever studied. "All batteries, open fire, target the creatures, everything." The Executor's turbolaser batteries opened fire, emerald bolts of coherent energy lancing through space toward the undead army that now surrounded the Imperial fleet. The other Star Destroyers added their firepower, creating a light show that would have been visible from parsecs away. Thousands of shots, each carrying enough energy to vaporize starfighters or punch through reinforced armor, converged on the summoned creatures. The Death Knights raised their shields, not technological force fields, but solid barriers of enchanted metal, and the turbolaser bolts splashed against them like water against stone. Some were struck directly and disintegrated, but for every one destroyed, 2 more materialized to replace it. The Soul Eaters simply absorbed the energy, their forms growing larger and more substantial with each hit. And the Elder Liches raised skeletal hands and conjured barriers of pure magical force that deflected even direct hits from the Executor's main batteries.
"Impossible," Pyatt whispered, his hands trembling as he watched the fleet's overwhelming firepower prove utterly inadequate against an enemy that operated outside every known physical law. "Nothing survives turbolaser fire. Nothing." Vader's mind raced through tactical options with the cold calculation of a master strategist facing an unprecedented situation. The Force still showed him nothing useful about these creatures. They registered as voids, as absences, as something his mystical senses simply could not process. His lightsaber would be useless against enemies that could survive starship-grade weapons. His force powers, devastating against living opponents, had no purchase on entities that seemed to exist in defiance of life itself. For the first time in decades, Darth Vader confronted something he couldn't simply overwhelm through superior power and ruthless efficiency. And that realization brought with it something he hadn't felt since his transformation on Mustafar: genuine uncertainty. "Cease fire," Vader commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. "All batteries stand down." "My lord!" Pyatt turned, his expression caught between relief and confusion. "Our weapons are ineffective," Vader stated flatly, forcing himself to acknowledge tactical reality over pride. "Continuing the assault wastes ammunition and reveals our limitations while accomplishing nothing. We will negotiate." Through the Force, Vader reached out not towards Nazarick itself, but towards the space around it, seeking any weakness or gap in the defensive perimeter. His consciousness touched one of the Soul Eaters, and what he sensed made his artificial lungs miss a breath. The creature wasn't simply undead, it was animated by a form of energy that felt like the dark side, but fundamentally wasn't. It was death given form and purpose, sustained by will and magic rather than midichlorians and the Force. It was, in essence, proof that the Force was not the only metaphysical power in the universe. The implications were staggering.
Lord Vader. Ainz's voice echoed through the bridge once more. I trust this demonstration has clarified certain misunderstandings about our respective capabilities. Your weapons are impressive by galactic standards, but Nazarick was constructed to withstand assaults from entities who wielded power you cannot imagine. Now, shall we discuss terms like civilized beings, or would you prefer I deploy entities that will make your crew question their sanity? Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence as every eye on the bridge turned toward him, waiting for orders from a commander who had never retreated, never negotiated from weakness, never acknowledged an enemy as beyond his ability to destroy. The Dark Lord of the Sith felt anger surge through him, rage at this entity's presumption, fury at being forced into a position of tactical disadvantage, and beneath it all, a cold whisper of something he refused to name as fear. "Recall all creatures to your structure," Vader commanded, his voice carrying the weight of barely restrained violence. "Demonstrate good faith, and I will consider negotiation." In Nazarick's throne room, Ainz allowed himself a moment of internal relief before his emotional suppression activated. The bluff had worked again. The summoned forces surrounding the Imperial fleet represented a significant portion of Nazarick's mobile defenders, and maintaining them in the void of space required constant expenditure of magical energy. If Vader had pressed the attack, forcing Nazarick to commit even greater resources, the situation could have escalated beyond control. But the Sith Lord had chosen tactical prudence over pride, which suggested intelligence and adaptability, dangerous qualities in a potential enemy. "Recall the forces," Ainz commanded, and Demiurge transmitted the necessary orders. The undead army vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, portals swallowing the creatures and leaving empty space where moments before an army had stood. The Imperial fleet remained locked in combat formation, weapons still powered and ready, but no longer actively firing. A tense standoff, with both sides having revealed just enough strength to make the other cautious.
Lord Vader, Ainz continued, his tone shifting to something approaching diplomatic courtesy. "I propose a meeting. You and a small honor guard may board Nazarick under flag of truce. I will guarantee your safety. Harm will not come to you or your companions while you remain as my guests. In return, you will hear my terms for coexistence with the Galactic Empire, and I will listen to yours. Surely this serves both our interests better than a protracted conflict that would cost both sides resources better spent elsewhere." Vader's tactical mind weighed the options. Boarding the enemy structure represented significant personal risk, despite assurances of safety. But it also provided opportunity to gather intelligence about Nazarick's internal layout, defensive systems, and the nature of this Ainz Ooal Gown entity. Knowledge gained through direct observation might prove more valuable than anything conventional sensors could reveal. And beneath the tactical calculation, something else stirred: curiosity. In all his years serving the Emperor, hunting Jedi, crushing rebellions, Vader had never encountered anything like this. An entity that commanded death itself, that existed outside the Force, that spoke with confidence born from genuine power rather than bravado. Part of him, the part that had once been Anakin Skywalker and still craved understanding of mysteries beyond his grasp, wanted to know what this thing truly was. "I will board your structure," Vader declared, "alone. Any treachery will result in the immediate destruction of Nazarick, even at the cost of my own life.
The Executor has standing orders to level this entire sector if I do not return within 1 standard hour. Acceptable, Ainz replied, though internally Momonga was screaming that inviting Darth Vader into Nazarick was possibly the most dangerous gambit yet. Demiurge, prepare the reception chamber, full diplomatic protocols, and ensure all Guardians understand. Lord Vader is a guest under truce. Any hostile action without my explicit command will be considered treason against the Sorceress Kingdom. As Vader prepared to depart the Executor, Admiral Piet approached with barely concealed concern. My lord, this could be a trap. We have no intelligence about their internal capabilities, no understanding of what you might face inside that structure.
Your concern is noted, Admiral, Vader replied, his tone suggesting the matter was not open for discussion. Maintain fleet readiness. If I do not return, execute Order Purge. Full bombardment, all batteries, maximum yield. Let nothing of this Nazarick remain. Vader's personal shuttle detached from the Executor and crossed the void toward the Great Tomb of Nazarick. As it approached, a portal of shimmering energy opened in the structure's obsidian surface. Not a mechanical airlock, but a magical gateway that seemed to fold space itself. The shuttle passed through, and Darth Vader entered a realm where the Force did not reach, and the rules of reality were written by an undead God King who had never heard of the Jedi or Sith. In the throne room, Ainz Ooal Gown rose to greet his guest, and the Sorcerer King prepared to negotiate with the Dark Lord of the Sith for the future of Nazarick in a galaxy that had no idea how profoundly everything was about to change. The shuttle's landing was unlike anything Vader had experienced in decades of military operations. No mechanical docking clamps engaged, no atmosphere equalization protocols activated, no standard Imperial procedure applied. Instead, the vessel simply settled onto a platform of polished obsidian that seemed to materialize beneath it, guided by forces that Vader's sensors registered as non-existent. The hangar, if it could be called that, was a vast chamber of impossible architecture, its walls carved with reliefs depicting scenes of conquest and death that seemed to shift and writhe when observed peripherally. Illumination came from no visible source, yet everything was perfectly lit in a cold, greenish luminescence that reminded Vader uncomfortably of the Death Star's super laser charging sequence. As the shuttle's boarding ramp descended, Vader extended his senses through the Force, seeking threats, analyzing the environment, preparing for betrayal. What he found was profoundly disturbing. The Force existed within Nazarick, but weakly, as if the very structure suppressed its presence. His connection to the dark side remained, but muted, like trying to hear through water. It was the metaphysical equivalent of fighting with one hand bound. Possible, but significantly more difficult. Standing at the base of the ramp was a figure that appeared entirely human, a distinguished man with silver hair, impeccably dressed in what resembled a butler's formal attire. His posture was perfect, his expression pleasant and welcoming, but Vader's instincts screamed warnings. Through the attenuated force, he sensed no deception from this being, but he also sensed no conventional life. Whatever this creature was, it wore humanity like a costume. Lord Vader, Sebas Tian bowed with precise formality. I am Sebas Tian, butler of the Great Tomb of Nazarick, and humble servant of the Supreme Being, Ainz Ooal Gown. My master extends his greetings and requests your presence in the throne room. If you would follow me, I will escort you through the upper levels. Please understand that many of Nazarick's deeper floors contain entities that might react poorly to an unexpected visitor. For your safety and theirs, we will take the most direct route. Vader studied the butler with the analytical precision of a predator assessing potential prey. The being's mannerisms were too perfect, his speech too formal, his entire presentation carefully constructed to project harmlessness and civility. But beneath the veneer, Vader sensed power, not force power, but something else entirely. Raw physical capability compressed into a form that could likely tear through blast doors with bare hands if provoked. Lead, Vader commanded, his hand resting near his lightsaber hilt, not threateningly, but ready. And understand that any perceived threat will be met with lethal force. Sebas's smile didn't waver. Of course, Lord Vader, I would expect nothing less from a warrior of your reputation. However, I feel compelled to inform you that within Nazarick's halls, your expectations of combat may require adjustment. They walked through corridors that defied conventional architecture. Passages seemed to stretch longer than the structure's external dimensions should allow. Gravity remained constant despite stairs that curved at physically impossible angles. And everywhere, Vader sensed the presence of watchers, entities hidden behind walls, observing through means his force senses couldn't quite identify. The psychological pressure was deliberate, he realized. This entire journey was designed to demonstrate that he was in an environment completely beyond his understanding or control. Tell me about your master, Vader said, his mechanical breathing echoing through the hallways. Sebas's expression transformed, shifting from professional courtesy to something approaching religious reverence. Lord Ainz is the supreme being, the absolute ruler of Nazarick and founder of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. He is undead, sustained not by the energies your galaxy calls the Force, but by magic from a reality your sensors cannot detect. He commands power that transcends mortal understanding, instant death with a word, manipulation of time itself, the ability to create and destroy life as casually as you might breathe. But more than his power, Lord Vader, it is his wisdom that truly defines him. In the realm we came from, he led a guild of supreme beings through trials that would have shattered lesser entities. He thinks not in terms of battles, but in terms of campaigns measured in decades and centuries. The butler paused before an enormous door carved from what appeared to be solid bone, covered in runes that glowed with faint crimson light. I tell you this not to intimidate, but to establish context. Lord Ainz does not fear the Empire, Lord Vader. He respects its capabilities and acknowledges its power, but he does not fear it. When you negotiate with him, understand that you speak with an entity who has faced threats that make your Death Squadron appear modest. The doors swung open soundlessly, revealing the throne room beyond. Vader's first impression was of overwhelming grandeur, married to absolute menace. The chamber was vast, easily 300 meters across, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to writhe with their own malevolent life. The floor was polished black stone, inlaid with intricate patterns of gold and silver that formed mystical sigils Vader didn't recognize. Columns carved to resemble enormous skeletal hands rose on either side of a central pathway, their fingers curved as if ready to snatch up any who approached uninvited. And at the far end, upon a throne constructed from thousands of humanoid skulls fused together by some unknown process, sat Ainz Ooal Gown. The undead Overlord was exactly as described in Imperial intelligence reports, a skeleton in ornate robes adorned with golden jewelry that somehow enhanced rather than diminished his aura of dreadful majesty. But reports couldn't capture the sheer presence the entity radiated. Even through the Force's suppression within Nazarick, Vader felt the weight of this being's existence. It was like standing before a singularity, a point in space-time where normal rules bent and broke. The crimson flames burning in those empty eye sockets tracked Vader's approach with intelligence that seemed to pierce through armor, cybernetics, and flesh to examine the fractured soul beneath. Flanking the throne stood beings that made Vader's tactical instincts catalog potential threats with rapid-fire intensity. A woman in obsidian armor whose beauty was matched only by the predatory hunger in her golden eyes. A demon in an immaculate suit whose smile suggested he found everything amusing and everyone expendable. A massive insectoid warrior whose crystalline weapons gleamed with frost that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled environment. Dark elf twins who watched with expressions of eager violence barely restrained. And others, each radiating power in different ways, each clearly devoted to the being on the throne with fanatical loyalty.
This was not a court. This was a hierarchy of monsters who had chosen one supreme monster to lead them. Darth Vader. Ainz's voice resonated through the chamber, bypassing conventional sound to speak directly to consciousness itself. Welcome to Nazarick. I trust Sebas provided adequate escort. We receive so few visitors that our hospitality protocols may seem unconventional. Vader stopped at what he judged to be a respectful but not submissive distance from the throne, his posture radiating the authority of someone who knelt only to the Emperor. I am here under flag of truce to negotiate terms of coexistence or confrontation. The Empire does not recognize your sovereignty, your territorial claims, or your right to exist in Imperial space without proper authorization.
However, you have demonstrated capabilities that warrant discussion before military solutions are pursued." "How diplomatic," Ainz observed, and Vader detected what might have been amusement in that inhuman voice. "Allow me to be equally direct. Nazarick is sovereign territory of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, a realm I established and govern under authority that predates your empire by dimensions rather than merely time. We did not request entry to your galaxy. We were brought here by circumstances beyond our control. However, now that we have arrived, I see opportunities for mutual benefit rather than mutual destruction." Albedo, standing at the throne's right hand, shifted slightly, a movement so subtle that only someone trained to notice combat preparation would detect it. Vader's hand moved fractionally closer to his lightsaber, and every guardian in the room tensed in response. The atmosphere crackled with potential violence, held in check by the thinnest threads of diplomatic protocol. "Albedo," Ainz said quietly, and the overseer of the Guardians immediately stilled. "Lord Vader is our guest. There will be no hostility unless I command it." "As you command, Lord Ainz," Albedo replied, though her golden eyes never left Vader, tracking him with the focus of a predator marking prey.
Ainz leaned forward slightly on his throne. "Lord Vader, I have researched your history as thoroughly as my resources allow. You were once a Jedi, yes? A warrior of the light side who fell to the dark side during what your histories call the Clone Wars. You served as a general, leading armies against the Separatists until circumstances transformed you into the Emperor's enforcer. You have hunted and eliminated dozens of Jedi survivors, crushed rebellions across multiple sectors, and command respect through a combination of mystical power and ruthless efficiency. Does my intelligence assess you accurately?" Vader felt cold rage surge through him at this casual recitation of his past, at this creature's presumption to understand what he had been and what he had become. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. Recognition that this entity understood transformation in ways few others could. Ainz Ooal Gown spoke of his past not with judgment, but with clinical interest, as one might discuss another being's metamorphosis. "Your intelligence is adequate," Vader replied, his mechanical voice betraying nothing. "Now tell me what you want, creature. The Emperor's patience is not infinite, and I did not board this structure to exchange histories." "What I want," Ainz said, rising from his throne with fluid grace that seemed wrong for a being composed of bones and robes, "is something the Empire has in abundance but values insufficiently. Information. I want comprehensive stellar cartography, political intelligence about galactic power structures, technological specifications for standard Imperial equipment, and most importantly, detailed documentation about this force you wield. In exchange, I offer 3 things. First, neutrality. Nazarick will not interfere with Imperial operations or provide aid to the rebellion. Second, access to magical capabilities your empire has never encountered, which could provide significant military advantages in your ongoing conflicts. And third, Ainz paused, his eye flames burning with cold intensity,
I offer to share something your Emperor desires above all else, the secret of immortality." The throne room fell absolutely silent. Every guardian turned to look at their master, shock registering on faces that rarely showed surprise at Lord Ainz's pronouncements. Demiurge's smile widened impossibly, his mind clearly racing through the implications of this gambit. Albedo's expression shifted from protective fury to calculating assessment. Even Sebas, standing near the doorway, allowed his perfect butler's mask to slip for a fraction of a second.
Galactic Overlord. Vader's mind worked through the offer with the cold precision of a master strategist and the burning curiosity that had once defined Anakin Skywalker. Immortality. The Emperor had pursued this goal through Sith alchemy, through cloning experiments, through every dark ritual the ancient texts described. Palpatine's greatest fear was death, his ultimate ambition to transcend mortality and rule eternally. And now, this undead creature, this thing that existed in defiance of death itself, offered the very knowledge the Emperor craved most. It was bait, obviously, transparently bait, but it was bait the Emperor could not ignore. "You claim to possess knowledge of immortality," Vader said slowly, his voice carrying skepticism that masked intense interest. "The Sith have pursued such knowledge for millennia. What makes you believe you understand something that has eluded the greatest dark side practitioners in galactic history?" Ainz gestured to himself with one skeletal hand. "I am the proof, Lord Vader. I do not breathe, do not eat, do not age, do not tire. I have existed in this state for years beyond counting, sustained by magic that operates on principles your force does not govern. I am functionally immortal, immune to disease, poison, instant death, and even the ravages of time itself. What your Emperor seeks through Sith alchemy, I achieved through a different path entirely. And while I cannot teach your master to manipulate midichlorians or strengthen his connection to the Force, I can teach him to transcend the need for such things by becoming something beyond life and death." It was a masterful negotiation tactic, Vader recognized. Offer the one thing the Emperor valued above all else, position it as exclusive knowledge that couldn't be obtained through conquest, and thereby transform potential conflict into potential alliance. The audacity was impressive, the execution flawless. And beneath his anger at being manipulated, Vader felt something he hadn't experienced in years: respect for an opponent's strategic thinking. "The Emperor will require proof," Vader stated. "Demonstration of your capabilities beyond simply existing as undead. Any Force user can sustain themselves through dark side energies. You claim to offer more."
Ainz nodded slowly. "Of course. Demiurge, bring forth the demonstration subject." The demon bowed and departed through a side entrance. Moments later, he returned, leading a creature that made Vader's artificial lungs catch. A rancor, one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, easily 5 meters tall and masses of muscle and teeth and rage. The beast struggled against invisible bonds, its roars echoing through the throne room, but it could not move beyond the circle Demiurge guided it into.
"Observe," Ainz said simply, and raised one skeletal hand. Death. The word resonated with power that made reality itself shudder. The Rancor's roar cut off mid-breath. Its eyes went blank. Its massive body collapsed like a puppet with severed strings, and Vader felt through the Force what he could only describe as the creature's life being ripped away. Not killed through physical trauma, not suffocated or poisoned, but simply ended. One moment alive, the next moment dead, with no transition between states. True resurrection. Ainz's hand moved in a complex gesture, and green light enveloped the Rancor's corpse. Flesh that had been cooling with death suddenly flushed with warmth. Eyes that had been empty suddenly blazed with renewed life. The creature gasped, its chest heaving as it drew breath after breath, clearly confused about what had just occurred. It was alive again, perfectly restored, with no sign that moments ago it had been definitively dead.
Instant death without conventional means, Ainz explained, lowering his hand. And resurrection that restores not a clone, not a Force ghost, but the genuine article, body, mind, and whatever your galaxy calls a soul, all returned to perfect functionality. This is but one application of the magic I command. There are 9 tiers of spells in my arsenal, Lord Vader, and what you just witnessed represents mid-tier capabilities. I possess super-tier magic that can alter reality itself, reshape the fundamental rules governing existence, and achieve effects your Force users would consider miracles. Vader stared at the Rancor, now calm and breathing normally, as if its death and resurrection had been a minor inconvenience. Through the Force, he could sense the creature was genuinely alive, not reanimated, not possessed, but truly living. If this magic could be applied to sentient beings, if it could restore the dead as easily as it had this beast, then the implications were staggering. Armies that couldn't be permanently killed, leaders restored after assassination, and most significantly, an emperor who need never fear mortality. "I will convey your offer to the Emperor," Vader said, finally, each word measured and precise. "He will decide whether your proposition warrants further negotiation. However, understand that any deception, any attempt to undermine Imperial authority will be met with total annihilation. The Empire has destroyed entire species for lesser offenses." "I would expect nothing less," Ainz replied, returning to his throne. "I will await the Emperor's response. In the meantime, consider this. Nazarick seeks neither conquest nor subjugation of your galaxy. We desire only sovereignty over our own territory and the freedom to exist without interference. Your empire spans millions of worlds. Surely you can spare one sector of wild space for a neutral power that offers alliance over antagonism." As Vader turned to depart, escorted once more by Sebas Tian, Ainz allowed himself a moment of internal relief before his emotional suppression activated. The gambit had worked. Vader was intrigued rather than hostile. The demonstration had been impressive without revealing truly dangerous capabilities, and most importantly, they had bought time. The Emperor would be unable to resist investigating the immortality claim, which meant diplomacy would continue rather than warfare beginning immediately. But as the doors closed behind the Sith Lord and Sebas guided him back toward the hangar, Demiurge approached the throne with his characteristic smile widened to its maximum predatory extent. Lord Ainz, your strategic brilliance continues to exceed all comprehension, the demon said quietly, ensuring only those in the throne room could hear. However, I must ask, can you actually teach this emperor to achieve immortality through undeath? The transformation requires very specific conditions in YGDDRASL's magic system. Will those same principles function in this galaxy? Ainz was silent for a long moment, his skeletal fingers drumming against the throne's armrest. Finally he spoke, his voice carrying an edge that made every guardian lean forward attentively. Honestly, Demiurge, I have absolutely no idea. But by the time the Emperor discovers whether it's possible or not, we'll have learned everything we need to know about the Force, Imperial technology, and galactic power structures to ensure Nazarick's dominance, regardless of whether they become our allies or our enemies. That was always the real objective. Demiurge's laughter echoed through the throne room, a sound of pure delight at his master's Machiavellian brilliance. And in that moment, the assembled guardians of Nazarick understood that they served not merely a powerful, undead overlord, but a strategic genius who thought in dimensions beyond simple combat or conquest. Darth Vader's shuttle departed Nazarick and returned to the Executor, carrying information that would change the course of galactic history. And Ainz Ooal Gown, sitting alone on his throne after dismissing his guardians, allowed Momunga's consciousness to surface just long enough to whisper a prayer to whatever gods might listen, that he hadn't just made a catastrophic mistake. The game continued, and the stakes had just become impossibly higher.
The galaxy would never be quite the same after the Great Tomb of Nazarick's arrival, though most beings living under the twin shadows of empire and rebellion would never know how close they had come to witnessing a conflict that would have redefined the very nature of power in their reality. In the months following Darth Vader's visit to Nazarick, a strange détente settled over wildspace, an unspoken agreement between the Sorcerer's Kingdom and the Galactic Empire that neither side would push the other toward open warfare until more could be understood about what such a conflict would truly cost. Emperor Palpatine received Darth Vader's report with the hungry fascination of a being who had spent decades pursuing immortality through every avenue the dark side offered. The demonstration of instant death and true resurrection represented capabilities that transcended anything Sith alchemy had achieved. Cloning could preserve consciousness, Force techniques could sustain life beyond natural limits, but nothing in the Emperor's vast arsenal could simply reverse death itself with a spoken word. The temptation was irresistible, and Palpatine's response reflected calculated pragmatism over his usual totalitarian impulses. He authorized formal diplomatic relations with Nazarick, not as an imperial vassal state, but as a neutral power worthy of cautious respect. The implications rippled through Imperial High Command like seismic tremors. Admiral Piet, elevated to Fleet Commander after his competent handling of the Nazarick incident, quietly revised tactical doctrine to account for enemies that conventional weapons couldn't effectively engage. Imperial intelligence opened a dedicated division focused solely on analyzing magic as a distinct phenomenon from the Force, staffing it with the Empire's most creative xenotechnologists and theoretical physicists. And Darth Vader himself began contemplating questions he had not entertained since his transformation on Mustafar. If death could be reversed through means beyond the Force, what did that suggest about the Sith doctrine of power through passion and the dark side's ultimate limitations?
For Ainz Ooal Gown, the aftermath brought both relief and new complications. The Gambit had succeeded beyond Mamanga's most optimistic projections. Nazarick had established itself as a recognized power without revealing the full extent of its capabilities or limitations. The Empire provided stellar cartography, technological specifications, and most valuable of all, comprehensive documentation about the Force. Demiurge had spent weeks analyzing how midichlorians functioned, how Force users manipulated reality through biological connections to cosmic energy, and most critically, how Nazarick's magic operated on completely separate principles that the Force could neither detect nor counter effectively. But recognition brought scrutiny. Imperial observers maintained constant surveillance of Nazarick's position, their long-range sensors probing the tomb's defenses with gradually increasing sophistication. Bounty hunters seeking fortunes offered by private interests began appearing in wild space, testing Nazarick's outer perimeter before being efficiently neutralized by Shaltir's vampire brides or Aura's summoned beasts. And most concerning, Force sensitives across the galaxy had begun reporting disturbing visions, dreams of a cold void where life ended, of an entity that existed outside destiny's flow, of death given form and terrible purpose. The Rebel Alliance learned of Nazarick's existence through intelligence channels and faced an agonizing strategic dilemma. Mon Mothma convened the Alliance High Command to debate whether this new power represented potential salvation or an even greater threat than the Empire. Some argued that any enemy of imperial totalitarianism deserved support, while others pointed out that an undead overlord commanding armies of monsters hardly aligned with the rebellion's stated values of freedom and democracy. Ultimately, pragmatism won. The Alliance dispatched covert operatives to establish contact with Nazarick, seeking to understand Ainz Ooal Gown's true intentions before committing to alliance or opposition. Princess Leia Organa personally led the diplomatic mission, her natural Force sensitivity causing her profound discomfort as their ship approached the Great Tomb. She described the sensation later as flying toward an absence, a place where the Force simply stops existing, as if approaching the edge of reality itself. The meeting between the princess and the Sorcerer King lasted 3 hours, and while details remained classified, Leia emerged with an assessment that surprised many. Ainz Ooal Gown was dangerous, alien, and utterly pragmatic. But he was not evil in the way Palpatine was evil. He sought survival and sovereignty, not galactic domination or the subjugation of all living beings. That distinction, however small, suggested possibilities for coexistence that didn't exist with the Empire.
Nazarick itself, transformed from a tomb lost between dimensions into a functioning sovereign territory. Demiurge implemented economic systems that leveraged the tomb's magical manufacturing capabilities to produce materials impossible to create through conventional means. Alloys that resisted lightsaber strikes, medical compounds that accelerated healing beyond Bacta's capabilities, and, most lucratively, enchanted items that wealthy collectors across the galaxy paid fortunes to acquire. The Sorceress Kingdom's treasury swelled with credits, giving Ainz resources to expand intelligence networks and establish covert listening posts throughout the Outer Rim. The Floor Guardians adapted to their new reality with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Shaltir reveled in opportunities to hunt Force-sensitive targets, her vampire abilities proving devastatingly effective against opponents whose precognitive combat senses couldn't predict attacks powered by blood magic rather than physical telegraphs. Cassitis established training protocols with Mandalorian mercenaries, warrior cultures recognizing kindred spirits across the species divide. Aura and Mare cataloged thousands of new creatures from across the galaxy, several of which proved compatible with Nazarick's domestication and enhancement magics. And Sebas Tian, ever the gentleman, became Nazarick's primary diplomat, his human appearance and impeccable manners making him the perfect intermediary with galactic civilization. Emperor Palpatine, meanwhile, pursued the promise of immortality with obsessive focus. He dispatched his most trusted Sith alchemists to study under Ainz Ooal Gown's tutelage, and what they learned both excited and frustrated the ancient Sith. The principles underlying undead transformation were genuine. The magic functioned exactly as demonstrated, but the transformation required exposure to energies that simply didn't exist naturally in the Star Wars galaxy. Nazarick possessed these energies because they had brought them from another dimension, but creating new undead required either Ainz's direct intervention or access to artifacts from XYDGDRASL that didn't exist in this reality.
The revelation should have ended negotiations, should have turned the Emperor's interest into fury at perceived deception. Instead, Palpatine saw opportunity. If Ainz could create undead through direct magical intervention, then the Emperor could achieve immortality, but only by binding himself to Nazarick's power structure, only by becoming dependent on the Sorcerer King's continued cooperation. It was a trap, elegant and perfectly constructed, and Palpatine recognized it as such. But unlike the crude manipulations he was accustomed to, this trap had been baited with something he genuinely wanted more than continued independence. The standoff that resulted defined the new galactic order. The Empire maintained respectful distance from Nazarick while studying magic as a distinct discipline. The rebellion cautiously established communication channels with the Sorceress Kingdom while maintaining careful neutrality. And Ainz Ooal Gown, sitting on his throne of skulls in wild space, played the role of enigmatic neutral power, while Momonga's human consciousness quietly panicked about the impossibly complex political game he was somehow winning through equal parts luck and improvisation. Darth Vader returned to his duties hunting rebels and Force sensitives, but something had changed in the Dark Lord's perspective. He had encountered an entity that existed beyond the Force's reach, that commanded power through entirely different mechanisms, and that demonstrated conclusively that the Sith's claimed mastery over life and death was incomplete at best. The certainty that had defined Vader's existence since Mustafar, that the Emperor's path was the only path, that the dark side represented ultimate power, had developed cracks. Not enough to turn him from his master, not enough to make him question his fundamental choices, but enough to make him wonder what other possibilities existed in a galaxy suddenly revealed to be far larger and stranger than Jedi or Sith had ever conceived. As months turned toward years, Nazarick became an accepted fixture of galactic politics. The mysterious neutral power in wild space that traded with all sides, interfered with none, and maintained absolute sovereignty through demonstrated capability rather than military conquest. Tourist ships began offering distant viewing tours of the Great Tomb, advertised as "Witness the galaxy's most mysterious anomaly from safe observation distance." Academic institutions published papers theorizing about Nazarick's dimensional origins. And somewhere in the unknown regions, ancient force cults whispered prophecies about an entity beyond destiny's reach who would either save or doom the galaxy when the true crisis finally arrived. Ainz Ooal Gown listened to these reports and allowed himself moments of satisfaction between the perpetual anxiety. They had survived. Against all odds, against impossible circumstances, Nazarick had established itself in an alien galaxy and not only endured, but thrived. The Sorceress Kingdom was real, recognized, and respected, even if that respect was born primarily from fear and uncertainty about what the undead Overlord might do if provoked. But late at night, when the Guardians had retired and Momonga's consciousness could surface without risking the illusion of supreme confidence, he stared at the star charts showing a galaxy at war with itself and wondered what would happen when the careful balance finally collapsed. The Force whispered warnings to those who could hear it, prophecies about a chosen one who would bring balance, about darkness rising and falling, about destiny's inexorable march toward confrontation, and Ainz Ooal Gown existing outside that destiny, outside the Force's grand design, represented a variable that no prophecy had accounted for. When that prophesied confrontation finally came, when Luke Skywalker faced his father and the Emperor's plans reached their culmination, would Nazarick stand aside and watch galactic fate unfold? Or would the Sorcerer King intervene, his actions cascading through destiny's carefully constructed narrative in ways no Force vision could predict? Only time would reveal the answer. But for now, in wild space, the Great Tomb of Nazarick pulsed with necromantic energy, and its master prepared for a future that even in a galaxy far, far away, remained profoundly uncertain.